Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the last lecture series. It's the 30th anniversary this year, and it's our first time coming back since COVID happened, so it's really exciting. My name is Bree Doby, and I'm the Vice Chair of Community Development and Residential Inclusion at Housing and Residence Life here at UVA, and it is my pleasure to be introducing our speaker tonight, Dr. Teresa Sullivan. Dr. Sullivan was the 8th and first female president at the University of Virginia, a position that she held from 2010 to 2018. She's also a sociologist and a scholar of labor force demography and immigration with a long and distinguished career in higher education. Before her tenure at UVA, she served as the provost and executive vice president for academic affairs at the University of Michigan, as well as the vice president for academic affairs and dean of the graduate school at the University of Texas, Austin. Dr. Sullivan is widely recognized for her leadership in higher education, particularly in academic excellence, diversity and inclusion, and innovation. During her presidency at UVA, she launched several major initiatives, including the Bicentennial Scholars Fund, which provided financial support to low and middle income students, and the Cornerstone Plan, which aimed to strengthen the university's academic, research, and public service missions. But tonight, we're not here to discuss Dr. Sullivan's vast achievements and accomplishments. Instead, we've invited her to participate in the last lecture series, where she'll have the opportunity to share her insights, reflections, and wisdom with us as if this were the last lecture she could ever give. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Teresa Sullivan.
Well, thank you, and thank you for coming tonight because there are a lot of things going on grounds. So I know you've had a lot of other things that you could have been doing with this evening. So this is called the last lecture, but it's a pseudo last lecture. I see some of my students here. You know that I got a class Friday or class Monday, so it's not really my last lecture. But this is Doug Laycock, my husband, the Robert Scott Distinguished Professor of Law. Today was his last lecture because he's going to retire next month. And in June, we're going to celebrate our 52nd anniversary. You can see a picture of us there from long ago. So this is what happens in the law school after your last lecture. Law faculty gather outside your classroom door, and this is called clapping him out. So they clapped him out today. So I affectionately dedicate this talk to Doug, because he's certainly been an important influence in my life. Well, when I was a freshman in high school English, I had to memorize the speech from As You Like It, and probably some of you are familiar with it too. Sweet are the uses of adversity, which like the toad, ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in its head. I don't know about all of you, but I played with toads when I was a kid. I never saw any jewels, did you? So the jewel is obviously something metaphorical. And in this talk, I'm going to talk about 6 sorts of adversity I've dealt with. And the 6 jewels are really the lessons I've drawn from it, because I think learning is one of the great things we do with our lives. And to keep on learning your whole life, I think, keeps you young your whole life. So let's talk about the first one. Adversity number 1, grief and loss. Now, we all end up experiencing that sometime in our lives. Because of COVID, a lot of families have experienced it just in the last 3 years. And, you know, we've had a lot of excess death, not just in the United States, but around the world. And a lot of people are coping with the loss of the sense of security they had, the loss of the companionship of somebody they loved, and of course, that empty place at the table. That's a hard thing to deal with at any age. I first dealt with it at the age of 11. In fact, a month after I turned 11. I was home with my father on that Saturday afternoon, and my mother was out of town. And I heard in the next room a loud crash, and I went next door into the next room, and my father's lying on the floor. and he's not breathing. And I realized I didn't really know what to do. I called an ambulance. I called a neighbor who was an Air Force major because I knew he had had a first aid course. But my father was dead on arrival at the hospital. He had a massive heart attack. So, at the age of 11, I inappropriately took too much guilt on myself for his death. I thought if only I had been better prepared, maybe I could have stopped it from happening. My mother was so concerned about my attitude, she actually had a doctor sit me down and explain that if it had happened on the operating room table, the doctors could not have saved him. And so why would I, an 11-year-old girl, think that I could save him? But nevertheless, I felt from that, the lesson I took from that was that it was important to be prepared. So that fall, my 6th grade class had 50 children in it, equally divided between boys and girls. But interestingly, 5 of the girls had lost a parent, 2 to cancer, 2 to heart disease, and 1 was a firefighter who was killed in an accident. And so the newly widowed mother of one of those classmates decided to form a Girl Scout troop. And that was enormously formative for me in learning to come to grips with my grief. And of course, I was very attracted to the Girl Scout motto, which was be prepared. I learned a lot of things as a Girl Scout. I'm a pretty good primitive camper. I know a whole lot of songs. I made lots of friends, some of whom are still among my very best friends. And I am, in fact, a lifelong member of the Girl Scouts. It was really important for me. But that lesson about being prepared, that became a more mature lesson as I went on as a Girl Scout. I did take the first aid courses, I took a life-saving course, I studied lots of things, but I realized that being prepared doesn't necessarily mean you have the knowledge and skills, but it means you know how to get to that knowledge and skills. So how did I ever use that in my life? Well, this was the first day of class in 2011. It was my 2nd year as president. Now, the University of Virginia Emergency Operations Center has a very long list of emergencies that they prepare for. And I had already been to 2 of the tabletop exercises. So we had exercises to prepare for tornadoes, fires, hazardous spills, and of course, active shooters. Unfortunately, we have to do those now. And at the very bottom of the list, so far down, in fact, that we had never actually done a drill, was earthquake. And the reason was, hadn't been an earthquake here since 1897. So no one remembered that one, and no one was prepared for it. By the way, the entire state now has an earthquake drill once a year, but that's a result of this earthquake. So this one was a 5.8. Let me tell you, you can feel a 5.8. It was not anything hidden from people, particularly those who were in buildings. And it's fair to say nobody knew what to do. So about half of the people on grounds ran indoors and the other half ran outdoors. In case you ever want to know, it's run indoors is the right thing, right? I'd actually been in an earthquake before. I had a little bit of knowledge. I stood in a door jamb because I didn't have time to get under a desk. But when it was over with, I went down the hall to the chief operating officer, and I'm improvising a plan as I'm walking. And I'm remembering a mantra we learned as Girl Scouts: save lives, save property, prevent damage, okay? So I said, listen, need to have you get the police out and see if we've got any injury reports. So we need to know if anybody's in danger of losing their life. I said, then you got to mobilize everybody in physical plant. I want to investigate all the bridges and all the tunnels first. Then go look at all the chimneys. And I also talked to the vice president for research. We need to check all the labs, because those chemicals shaking next to each other, bottles breaking and so on, it's not a good thing. And the hospital, they've got plenty of expertise in emergency operations. The hospital was doing fine by itself. By the way, this was a very damaging earthquake in a lot of the East Coast. The Washington Monument was closed for months afterwards because it was damaged. The National Cathedral lost one of its spires. It did a lot of damage. Well, it turned out that here on grounds, initially it didn't appear it had done too much damage. Tunnels are okay, right? The bridges were okay. The phone system went down immediately because the parents of 23,000 students are trying to call in, and 23,000 students are trying to call out to tell their parents they were okay. And the phone system just crashed. So UVA Alerts was born that day because one of the things we learned was, text messages use less bandwidth. And so we began to convert to have a way to keep the parents from calling on the phone so that we could retain the phone for other emergency uses and instead use text messages. Well, the one thing, though, that we did find and we didn't expect was the guys from the physical plant got up on top of all the roofs on the lawn, and they discovered that every single chimney was damaged. This is Madison Hall, where I was at the time. Here's the chimneys. So the chimneys were not actually damaged by the earthquake. The earthquake was the excuse for inspecting them. The chimneys had obviously been deteriorating for a long time, and so for many of them there was no mortar left between the bricks. The bricks were basically just stacked on top of one another. And this is a very unsafe situation. Upon further inspection, we discovered that all the attics on the lawn were connected and there were no firewalls. So if a fire had started in one lawn room and it broke through the roof, it would have spread to all the rest of them because we didn't have firewalls. So we replaced the chimneys, we put in firewalls, and we put in sprinklers. Now I took a lot of grief about the sprinklers. If you haven't been in a lawn room and looked for the sprinkler, please go look one time and just see if you can find it. They're very unobtrusive, but there were people who said if Thomas Jefferson had wanted to have sprinklers, he would have put them in. Well, you know what? Thomas Jefferson didn't put in electricity either, and we put that in. The truth is, Thomas Jefferson loved gadgets. He would have been thrilled with sprinklers. They didn't have them in his time. So we did put in sprinklers because we thought it important to make the lawn rooms as safe as we could. As safe, let's say, as the other residence halls that we had. So that was good, but while we were at it, I had some other things I thought we needed to inspect. This is what the rotunda looked like when I first visited the university the week before I was elected president. I thought we were in mourning for some distinguished person because of the black shrouds on tops of the capitals. But the black shrouds never came down, and I didn't think we were in mourning that long, and so I finally said, why are those up there? And what I learned was that the capitals were crumbling, and the shrouds were to keep pieces of marble from falling on people who were walking underneath. And Leonard Sandridge, the longtime COO, had a baggie that he showed me that had fragments of marble that had fallen off the capitals of the columns. Well, so the story here, you all know that the rotunda burned back at the end of the 19th century. And the original columns and capitals had been carved of marble from Carrara, Italy, the famous place for the best marble in the world. But when the rotunda burned, the university thought that was too expensive, and so the new columns were made from a cheaper marble from Vermont. And it just didn't weather very well. And so these columns were, let's face it, they were in terrible shape. So what could we do? I took the baggie of marble fragments and I went to the state legislature. Went to the state legislature every time they met anyway, so I thought I might as well try and do some good for the university. I went to legislators' offices, I showed them the bag of marble. I said, this is really dangerous. We need some money to help us repair the rotunda. And after I did this for about 3 years, I think the legislators were just tired of seeing me in my baggie. And so we made a deal. They said, well, we'll give you $100 million if you can raise the rest. That was good. Let me go to the alumni. Many of our alumni are pretty angry at the legislature because they feel it doesn't give enough support to the university. I go to the alumni and say, look, we've got a matching grant from the General Assembly. And if we can match this money, we can do these repairs we need to do for the rotunda. Well, the alumni came through magnificently. We were able to do a lot of repairs. And here again, we found there was much neglected that needed attention. So there had been water incursions in various parts of the rotunda for a long time. And sometimes you could actually see the water drips down the wall, but usually it was inside the walls. And inside the walls, wood had begun to rot. The oculus in the dome room leaked. There were lots of problems. But we had raised enough money to do a spectacular renovation of the rotunda, and while we were at it, we talked with students and others about what they wanted in the rotunda. One of my interns had done her paper on the subject of what undergraduates knew about the rotunda, and she found that in her sample of students, most of them had never been in the rotunda. Some of them thought they were forbidden to enter the rotunda. It was not a place that students felt welcome. So we've put in classrooms there now, and a lot of the rotunda is used as study hall space in the evening, and it's much more used now, I think, than it was before the renovation. But one of the important things we did was that we took down those ugly black shrouds, and then we got cranes and we took down the old capitals to put up the new ones. That's what the new ones look like. They were carved in Carrara, Italy. We had one capital left from the original rotunda. We were able to make a 3D laser drawing of it, which we sent to Carrara, and their stonecutters were able to reproduce what was here originally when the rotunda was first built. But we discovered something important. People were worried about getting those old capitals down, not just because they were going to crumble, but because they didn't know how they were attached to the columns. We couldn't find any blueprints or records or anything that told us. Well, what we found out was they weren't attached to the columns. They were being held there by gravity. And the next earthquake could have brought down the rotunda. Well, these new ones are anchored in several ways, and we think that they're pretty safe. But that was an example of our being prepared for the next time. And I have to say that Colette Sheehy, who is the Senior Vice President for Physical Plant and a bunch of other things, our architect, all the people who worked with us in construction, they did a spectacular job with this renovation. But in some ways, it reflected back well on my Girl Scout training, I think, because it represented a way to be prepared. Okay, let's go to the second adversity. Unexpected opposition. If any of you have thought you would like to be university administrators, let me tell you, this is one you're going to become familiar with. So in January of 2006, I was a longtime member of the faculty at the University of Texas. I'd been at Texas for 25 years. And that January, the University of Texas won the National Football Championship. And the next day, it was announced that I was the new provost at the University of Michigan. So the Michigan Daily almost immediately ran an editorial. And this editorial was, to put it mildly, critical. So what was the lesson I learned from this? The lesson I learned from this was to be curious. And I have attributed this to every cat everywhere, because if you've ever had a cat, you know that cats are curious. This cat is Frat Cat. I hesitate to say Frat Cat is my cat. You know, the old saying, dogs have owners, cats have staff. I'm part of Frat Cat's staff. Frat Cat, as a feral kitten, came and adopted Cars Hill. And John Castine was the steward for Frat Cat until I became president, and then I became steward. And when we began to renovate Cars Hill, Frat Cat came to live with us. So that's Frat Cat sitting on our patio, looking kind of grumpy actually, which is pretty typical for Frat Cat. But anyway, one thing that Frat Cat teaches you is always be curious, inspect every corner, look at every leaf, find out everything that's going on around you. So to go back to the Michigan Daily, we started off with, although Teresa Sullivan is no stranger to Michigan's harsh winters, she completed her undergraduate education at Michigan State University. It'll take much more than donning maize and blue to prove herself a true Wolverine. What's the real problem here? I went to Michigan State University. That would be like us hiring somebody from Virginia Tech to be the provost here. Because our introduction to the university will come while serving as its chief academic officer, overseeing all the university's deans and reporting only to the president, Sullivan will have a steep learning curve. Well, I agree with that. I thought I was going to have a steep learning curve. And, one of the advantages of coming to a school from the outside is that you don't assume anything because you don't know what this school is like. And so I came into the university knowing I had a whole lot to learn and ready to learn it. So I said to my assistant the first day, I said, look, your job is to get me out of here 2 hours a day to look at some part of the university I haven't seen yet. And so she put her head together with a lot of other people. They had me going all kinds of places. So I visited the university's bog. Who knew that the university had a bog, but they did. I visited the second sub-basement of the hospital where the university pharmacy was located. I saw all kinds of things, and as a result, I learned a lot. I talked to a lot of people who'd never seen a university provost before. And a couple of months later, the Michigan Daily writes a little bit about me. And they refer to this as provost prowls. And those are these walks I took every day around the university to learn new things. And I did learn a lot. It was very helpful. And it was a steep learning curve. But I was curious, and I wanted to find things out. And I felt it paid off for me in a number of ways. So here's how it ended. When I was named president here at Virginia, the Michigan Daily had another editorial. This one was, had a little bit of praise mixed in, for a Spartan from East Lansing. Sullivan's savvy in managing the university's budget was one of their strong points. This was kind of ironic because when I got to Virginia, a lot of alumni weren't too happy to have a woman running their university. And so one of the first criticisms was that I was not an alumnus of Virginia. That's right, because when I graduated from high school, they didn't admit women. So there wasn't any way I was going to be an alumna of the University of Virginia. But the second thing was, they were really worried that I couldn't handle the budget and that I wouldn't be able to deal with the complexity and so on. Well, let me tell you, Michigan is about twice the size of Virginia. The budget is about twice the size of Virginia's budget. Student body, about twice the size. Number of alumni, about twice the size. It's a very big place. And so I did have the advantage of having been in a place that was pretty big and complex. Now, that's not to say that Virginia doesn't have its own complexities, but my experience at Michigan motivated me strongly to be curious about Virginia and learn about what those complexities were, the things that I hadn't known about before. So being curious again was another important lesson that I think I benefited from. A book I would recommend to those of you who haven't read it before is Carol Dweck's Mindset. Because Carol Dweck talks about, she wouldn't say being curious, but she would say that many people in the United States have a fixed mindset about certain things. That is, if it doesn't come easy or naturally to you, then you're not supposed to do it. And so basically you don't even try. Whereas a growth mindset says, this might be hard, I don't know how to do it now, but I can learn. And so Dweck feels that you will have a more successful and fulfilled life by developing this growth mindset as opposed to closing off quarters to yourself forever just because you think I'm not good at this. So even if you think you're not good at something, you might give it a try. So here's adversity number 3. Since we're getting really close to finals, this one probably hits home. Too much to do and role overload. So, I've always felt that I was extremely busy, and then I found at every stage of my career I've been even busier. And, I thought I can't possibly stretch anything else in my day. And, then I got asked to do it. I really sympathize with this photograph. This kind of juggling, I think a lot of people end up doing. And, so not too long into my career, I had children. I had big research projects I was doing. I had substantial numbers of classes I was teaching. We had aging parents. This was challenging. But everybody is going through this challenge. It's not just you. And so this is a form of adversity that's kind of an equal opportunity adversity. We all end up dealing with it. So how do you deal with it best? What was my learning from this? So my learning from this was to be intentional. And the quote I have here is, the busier you are, the more intentional you must be. That is, the more you've got to think about that time and how you use it. I like this painting from Salvador Dali, The Persistence of Memory, which shows those melted clocks, because sometimes I felt like my own time was melting away and I didn't know how I was going to get everything done. So what have I learned about being intentional? One of my friends once said to me, today is a gift. That's why they call it the present. And there's a lot of wisdom in that. Too many people are busy thinking about their future or ruminating over the past. They don't have enough time to enjoy the day they're in today. But today is the day we've been given. So today is the day you need to think about, how can I make the most of today? If you begin with that idea every morning, how can I make the most of today? You will form the intention of how you want to spend that day, and you'll use your time better. Time's your most valuable possession. All of us get 24 hours a day. Nobody gets any more. And so how you use your time is really important. Now, I'm not telling you that you should go sell more of your time in a capitalist market. That's not necessarily the best way to use your time. Might be for some people, but it's not for everybody. You probably need to have some time to be with your friends, some time to get some recreation. You certainly need some time for sleep and rest. But the important thing is to not do it accidentally, but to think about it. Because if you approach your day accidentally, other people will plan it for you. And that won't be nearly as much fun or as effective. The third point is, for me as an administrator, the time of the faculty is the most valuable resource of the university, because it's the faculty members who teach the students, it's the faculty who do the research or direct the research, it's the faculty who treat our patients. And so if you're wasting the time of the faculty, you're wasting the most valuable resource of the university. And there are a lot of ways, believe me, to waste the time of the faculty. One of the things that irritates me the most is sitting through a meeting that could have been an email. There's no reason to have those meetings. Send the email instead. Second thing that irritates me is going into a meeting that has no agenda. Because I guarantee you, faculty members, we love to talk. And if you tell us it's a 90-minute meeting, we'll fill out those 90 minutes somehow. But if we don't have an agenda, it'll be a little bit aimless. So for an administrator, I think it's always important to think about, am I using the faculty time well? And that's not to say you don't consult them. That's an important thing to do. But don't consult them over what color paper clips you're going to get. So there are a lot of ways to do time management. I found one that works for me. I hope you find one that works for you. I spend some time every morning planning my day. And I think about, what are the things I really want to try and get done today? It's a bit like a to-do list, except that I try to integrate things I need to get done around the house, as well as things I need to get done at work, plan in some time for exercise, and so on. And then whenever I make an appointment with somebody, I immediately record it. Because if I don't, the risk is too great that I'll either forget it or I'll double book. And then I'll have 2 appointments at the same time. You find the system that works for you. There's lots of apps these days. There's old-fashioned paper methods. There's lots of ways to do it. But getting a system will probably serve you well. Another thing to do when you're planning your time is to think about, with your priorities, the difference between what's urgent and what's important. So, not infrequently, as an administrator, somebody runs into your office with their hair on fire and says, it is absolutely urgent that we get this done today. Well, it might be urgent, but it isn't necessarily important. And if it's truly urgent, it can often be delegated to somebody else to get done. It's the negativity bias. And so the fact that students were overwhelmingly happy with this class That'll completely go out of cognition unless you make a real effort to say, oh wait, I'm succumbing to the negativity bias here. Most students are really happy with this course. So it helps us to just reframe our lives thinking, I'm subject to the negativity bias, how do I get around it? So I have pretty bad arthritis. When I get up in the morning, sometimes it feels like this. But I do my best not to concentrate on the parts of me that hurt, but instead to think about the things that make me happy. And just the fact that, I'm on this side of the dirt and I'm still breathing, those are two things that you can celebrate every day. So it's not that you overlook your limitations. You're going to have to pay attention to them to some extent, but you don't have to dwell on them. You don't have to let them make it a bad day. There are antidotes to the negativity bias, and I think one of them is to spend a few minutes every day reflecting on the day and reflect on the things that you're grateful for. I try to do this in the evening before I go to bed. This is sometimes discussed as counting your blessings. I think that's a good, healthy practice as well. Lots of things are going well for us, and we have many things to be grateful for, but it's very easy to focus on the negative things that happen today. Many people keep a gratitude journal in which they actually write down the things they liked, like the beautiful weather today, all the glorious flowers we've had in Charlottesville this spring, something nice that somebody said to them in one of their classes. And then finally, another way to deal with the negativity bias is just to breathe. Concentrate on your breathing for about 3 minutes. Concentrate on your breath. If your mind wanders, bring it back. Listen to your breath some more. You'll find your heart rate goes down. The adrenaline stops running so much. It helps you deal with it in the moment. And finally, I guess the last thing I would say is a good antidote to the negativity bias is to say thank you, and to say it often, and to say it to a lot of people. And so now I will say it to all of you. Thank you for being here.